My name is Marcus, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived with a secret. On the outside, I appear to be the epitome of suburban stability 38-year-old husband, a father to a bright and curious daughter, and a technician who spends his days repairing refrigeration systems. I've built a life that looks solid from the outside, but beneath the surface, there's a part of me that I've kept hidden, even from myself. It was late one evening, and I was driving home after a long day at work. The rain was pouring down in sheets, the rhythmic pounding of the droplets on the windshield blending with the low hum of the radio. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and every so often, lightning illuminated the dark, empty road ahead. As I rounded a bend near my neighborhood, I spotted a figure walking along the side of the road, head bowed against the storm. I slowed down, immediately recognizing him, Timothy, my 21-year-old neighbor. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his lean frame, his hair plastered against his forehead. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Tim, what are you doing out here in this weather?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the rain. He looked up, relief flashing in his eyes. "Marcus, my car broke down a few miles back. I was walking home." "Get in," I said without hesitation. "You'll catch your death out there." Timothy didn't need convincing. He slid into the passenger seat, water pooling on the leather as he shook his head like a dog, spraying droplets everywhere. "Sorry about the mess," he said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "Don't worry about it," I replied, turning up the heat. "Let's get you home." As I drove, the storm continued to rage around us, but inside the car it was warm and quiet. Timothy rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the chill. "Thanks for stopping," he said after a moment. "Not everyone would have done that." "You are my neighbor," I said with a shrug, glancing at him. "We look out for each other around here." He smiled, and for a moment, the boyish charm that had always made him so likable shone through. "I appreciate it, really," he said. "Guess I got lucky you came by when you did." Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I told myself it was just the remnants of a long day and the lingering adrenaline from the storm. By the time we reached his house, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. "You want to come in for a coffee or something?" Timothy offered, his voice casual but his eyes hopeful. I hesitated, glancing at the clock on the dashboard. My wife and daughter would be asleep by now, and the idea of sitting down for a moment of quiet was tempting. "Sure," I said, cutting the engine. "Why not?" As I followed Timothy inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was just the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. Timothy's house was dark except for the warm glow of a lamp in the living room. The place felt empty, the silence broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows. He gestured for me to sit on the couch while he disappeared into the kitchen. "Coffee okay?" he called out. "Yeah, thanks," I replied, glancing around. The house was neat but minimal, with little in the way of decoration, save for a few scattered photos and a tennis racket propped against the wall. Timothy returned moments later, carrying two steaming mugs. He handed me one before settling into the armchair across from me, his damp hair still clinging to his forehead. "Not exactly how I planned my evening," he said, smiling wryly as he blew on his coffee. "I doubt anyone plans to get stranded in a storm," I replied, taking a sip of the rich brew. He chuckled, and for a moment we sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of the coffee easing the chill that still lingered from the rain. "I guess I've always liked storms," Timothy said after a while, his voice thoughtful. "They're chaotic, but there's something freeing about them, you know?" I nodded, understanding more than I cared to admit. "Yeah, sometimes it feels like they wash everything clean, make you see things differently." Our eyes met then, and the weight of the moment settled between us, heavy and unspoken. Timothy shifted in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the mug. "Can I ask you something, Marcus?" he said softly, his gaze unwavering. "Sure," I said, though my chest tightened with anticipation. "Do you ever feel like you are living someone else's life?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew. Timothy hesitated, his brow furrowing as he searched for the right words. "Like you've built this life that looks perfect on the outside, but inside, it doesn't feel like you." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt my pulse quicken. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "But that's just part of growing up, isn't it? You make choices and you live with them." "Yeah," he said, leaning forward. "But what if those choices don't make you happy? What if you are just pretending?" The vulnerability in his voice sent a ripple through me, and I saw a reflection of my own hidden struggles in his eyes. It's not easy to admit something like that, I said quietly. Timothy nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. I guess I just feel stuck sometimes, like there's this part of me that I can't show anyone. I know the feeling, I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out unbidden. His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink, the space between us charged with an intensity I hadn't expected. You do? I nodded, unable to look away. More than you know. The silence that followed was deafening, every second stretching into an eternity. Finally, Timothy set his mug down and stood, crossing the small distance between us to sit on the couch beside me. I am glad you stopped tonight, he said softly, his voice steady despite the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Me too, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. The distance between us was almost non-existent now, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew this moment would change everything. The space between us felt like a fragile thread, stretched tight and ready to snap. Timothy sat so close that I could see the faint drops of water still clinging to his skin, the way his chest rose and fell with each measured breath. My heart pounded a relentless rhythm that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Marcus, he said softly, his voice breaking the stillness, you don't have to pretend with me. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I had spent so many years hiding, burying parts of myself so deep that I almost believed they didn't exist. But now, sitting here with Timothy, I felt something shift, a crack in the carefully constructed facade I had built. I don't know how to stop, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Timothy reached out then, his fingers brushing against mine. The contact was brief but electrifying, sending a jolt of heat through me. Maybe you don't have to figure it all out tonight, he said, his gaze steady. Maybe it's enough just to be honest with yourself, with me. His words undid me. Without thinking, I turned toward him, my eyes searching his face for answers I couldn't find within myself. The vulnerability in his expression mirrored my own, and for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Tim, I began, my voice trembling. This is complicated. It doesn't have to be, he said, his voice firm yet gentle. We can take it slow, one step at a time. Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was tentative yet filled with quiet intensity. My breath caught as I felt the warmth of his touch, the softness of his lips. It was as though the storm outside had found its way into the room, the energy between us crackling with unspoken emotion. I didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself leaning into him, my hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. The years of hiding, of denying this part of myself, melted away under the weight of the moment. When we finally broke apart, our foreheads rested against each other, both of us breathing heavily. I've wanted this for so long, Timothy admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Me too, I confessed, my chest tight with a mix of fear and exhilaration. He smiled, his hand still resting on mine. Then, let's stop hiding, he said softly, at least when it's just us. His words felt like a lifeline, a way forward that I hadn't dared to hope for. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. Okay, I said, just us. The quiet intensity of the moment lingered as we sat there, the storm outside a distant hum compared to the whirlwind of emotions swirling between us. For the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift, replaced by something raw, something real. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new world, one where the lines between right and wrong blurred. In the quiet moments we shared, Timothy and I found ways to see each other under the pretense of innocent activities, quick chats in the yard, casual drinks after work. But it was the private moments, stolen away from the watchful eyes of the world, where our connection deepened. One evening, Timothy suggested we go fishing, a perfect excuse to escape the routine of our lives. No one will question it, he said with a playful grin. Just two neighbors spending time outdoors. The lake was secluded, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson, we sat side by side on the dock, our fishing lines trailing into the still water. You've been quiet, Timothy said, breaking the silence. Just thinking, I replied, glancing at him. His profile was illuminated by the fading light, and I couldn't help but marvel at the ease with which he seemed to carry himself. About what? He asked, his voice soft. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. About how much has changed, I admitted. About how different things feel when I am with you. Timothy turned to me, his eyes searching mine. It doesn't scare you? He asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. It does, I said honestly. But it also feels right. He smiled then, a quiet, knowing smile that made my chest tighten. I feel the same, he said, his voice steady. Like I finally found something real. The air between us grew heavy, the tension palpable as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving us bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Slowly, Timothy reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant, but it sent a rush of warmth through me. Without thinking, I turned toward him, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound of the water lapping against the dock faded into the background as I leaned in, our lips meeting in a kiss that was soft yet filled with unspoken emotion. Timothy's hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. My own hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my palms. We shouldn't be doing this, I murmured against his lips, though my actions betrayed my words. I know, he whispered, his breath warm against my skin, but I don't want to stop. Neither did I. In that moment, the weight of our secret felt inconsequential compared to the intensity of what we shared. The world outside didn't matter. All that mattered was the quiet flame burning between us. We pulled back slightly, our foreheads resting together as we caught our breath. Timothy's hand remained on my neck, his thumb tracing small, comforting circles. We'll figure this out, he said softly, his voice filled with quiet determination. I nodded, my chest tight with a mix of fear and hope. Together, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The night stretched on, and as the stars began to appear in the darkened sky, we sat in silence, our connection unspoken but undeniable. The next time Timothy and I stole away, we chose a quiet cabin by the river, far from the prying eyes of our suburban lives. The pretense of a weekend fishing trip provided us the perfect cover, but we both knew the real reason we were there. The cabin was rustic, with creaking wooden floors and the faint smell of pine. Outside, the river murmured softly, a calming backdrop to the storm of emotions that swirled between us. We spent the day pretending to fish, laughing at the absurdity of it all. But as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the pretense faded, leaving only us. Inside the cabin, Timothy lit a fire, its flickering light casting warm shadows across the room. He stood by the hearth, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on me. This feels like a dream, he said, his voice low, almost reverent. I smiled, crossing the small distance between us. If it is, I don't want to wake up. His lips quirked into a soft smile before he stepped closer, his hands gently cupping my face. Marcus, he said, his voice filled with emotion, I don't care what anyone thinks. When I am with you, everything else fades away. His words struck a chord deep within me, and before I could respond, he leaned in, capturing my lips in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. My hands found his waist, pulling him closer as the warmth of his body pressed against mine. The fire crackled softly in the background as we moved together, our breaths mingling, our touches exploring. Timothy's fingers traced the line of my jaw, down my neck, and over my shoulders, as if memorizing every detail. I felt his heart racing against mine, a steady rhythm that mirrored my own. You are everything I didn't know I needed, I murmured against his lips, my voice thick with emotion. He pulled back just enough to meet my gaze, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. And you are the only person who's ever made me feel this alive, he said softly. The weight of his words settled over me, and I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just a fleeting moment, a secret stolen under the cover of night. It was real, tangible, and worth every risk we had taken to get here. As the fire burned low, we found ourselves tangled together on the worn couch, the world outside a distant memory. Timothy's hand rested lightly on my chest, his thumb tracing lazy circles over my heart. What happens when we go back? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, my fingers brushing through his hair. We keep this between us, I said firmly. But no matter what, we'll find a way to make it work. He nodded, his expression softening. As long as I have you, I can handle anything, he said, the quiet determination in his voice sending a surge of warmth through me. I pulled him closer, my lips brushing against his forehead. You'll always have me, I promised. The night stretched on, and as the fire died down to embers, we lay in silence. The bond between us solidified in a way that needed no words. In that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, unshaken, unbreakable.